What's up, Internet? Today on Bonesaw's Garage, we're going to be changing out the water pump on a 2007 Dodge Ram. Now, a couple reasons why a water pump would go out on a vehicle could be low coolant. It's not allowing the water pump to get lubricated, putting extra stress on the pump, age, a number of different things. This one, the vehicle has about 120,000 miles on it, and it's on a 5.7 Hemi in a Ram 1500. This seems to be pretty common for these trucks, right around 120,000 miles. That's when the water pump wants to start going out. So I'm going to show you how to change the water pump. It's not going to be overly detailed, not every step by step, because I'm going to try to generalize it for most vehicles. And I'm also going to show you some of the stuff that you'll need when you're changing out a water pump on your vehicle. So obviously you're going to need a replacement water pump. This one I got from Rock Auto. And it's always a good idea to just kind of give an overall look on it, make sure everything's good, kind of get an eyeball when you're looking at your front of your vehicle if everything's the same. Now, if you're replacing a water pump, some of the other things you need to be aware of, there should be some other stuff that you should probably replace with it. One that is an absolute must is your thermostat. They're very inexpensive, and if your water pump's going out, it's a good idea to change out your thermostat as well. Now, this pump came with a thermostat gasket, but when I bought the new thermostat, it also came with a replacement gasket. So you're going to want to get new ones of those. This particular water pump, it has an O-ring gasket that's going to fit into this groove here. Now, since this has been sitting in my garage, it's rather cold. I took the gasket, I put it in the house close to one of my registers with the heat on to try to get it a little bit more malleable. So it'll sit in here so I won't have any high spots. It'll go on a little bit easier, and it'll have more flexibility when it gets bolted to the engine. As you can see right here, this is where the thermostat's going to bolt on. Since you have to replace it from one vehicle to the other, there's no reason to not replace this. Now, another good thing to replace is your serpentine belt. Again, this is fairly inexpensive. You have to take it off to get to the pump anyways, so you might as well get a replacement one to make sure that everything is good. It makes no sense to replace your water pump and then your serpentine belt fails, causing your vehicle to overheat. Now, continuing on with things that you're going to need to replace, or you should replace, one is your radiator cap. Now, your radiator cap puts pressure inside the radiator to help raise the boiling point of the fluid or coolant inside of your engine. So if your water pump is going out, this is about the same age, and it's a very, again, inexpensive thing that people forget about that you should probably replace. This is another thing that people may not be aware of or think about. This is a fan clutch. Now, a lot of newer vehicles, they actually have electric fans. On a lot of the pickups, they still run mechanical fans. Now, what this is there's a fluid coupler or a spring inside here. When it's cold, there's a lot of resistance that doesn't like to turn. And as it heats up, it changes the spring of fluid pressure on it to help it cooling or not cooling. And basically, so when you're going down the road and your engine's running at good temperature, it doesn't need a lot of cooling, this free spins very, very easily. Whereas at lower temperatures, when it gets hot, it starts heating up, it starts locking up more. So this can also go bad. It wears over time. You have to think this is constantly spinning. And a lot of people don't think about it, and your water pump could actually be good, but this could be bad, depending if somebody's replaced the water pump, but they didn't replace this. And obviously you're going to need coolant to replace. You shouldn't reuse your coolant. You can, but you really shouldn't. So always get the proper manufacturer's recommendation. And one thing I always look for is the regular concentrate. You can see how this one says must add water. Now, certain mixes you can get, they'll say 50-50 mix. And that means it's already pre-mixed, and generally these are more expensive, which doesn't make sense since half of it is water. Legitimately, it's just water. So I get the concentrate so I can mix it myself. So you can do it whatever mixture you want. 50-50 is generally what's needed. If you live in a much colder climate, you might want to go 70-30. If you live in an extremely warm climate, maybe you won't run any coolant at all, you'll just run water. Now, on top of that, you can run water, but I would highly recommend getting distilled water. Everybody says that distilled water is better. You can talk to hundreds of people and they'll say, hey, I've used tap water every time I've ever changed it. I've never had a problem. And that's probably true. I just prefer to have the extra assurance. I'm using distilled water. It's 90 cents for a gallon. And like I said, getting this, this will technically make 2 gallons of coolant. So I've got 2 gallons of coolant, 2 gallons of that, so we'll make 4 gallons. So that's the basic stuff that you'll need, a couple of extras. So let's start tearing everything apart and see how this goes. Okay, so as we get ready to start this project, a couple things. One, it's always good to have a light, since you're going to be getting down in areas where there's really no place for even overhead lights to get to. Second, you want to make sure that the vehicle is cold. If you've been driving this around, you don't want to start doing a water pump because there's still heat inside the motor and inside the coolant. So right here, we have our coolant cap, a radiator cap, and it was cold. I took that off. So we're replacing that, but it's always to keep stuff as a spare for emergencies. Now another thing to do is, you can see I've got a blank dry erase board here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to draw out the belt routing for the front of the motor. That way I don't have to look it up later. Some vehicles, if you look, there might be a tag somewhere inside the engine bay that'll show you the belt routing. This vehicle does not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw it on the whiteboard here. Now if you have a Chilton's manual, or you can look it up on Google or something, but I'd rather just draw it up here so I can get it done faster later. Alright, so if you can forgive my poor artistry skills, it'll look something like this. Now you don't have to label all the individual things, it just helps me keep an order. Now obviously you can't fit the full names of stuff in there, so here I have just ALT for alternator, AC for AC, PS for power steering. But this gives me a general idea of the belt routing, so when I go to put everything back on, I can double check and I can put it back on the correct way. A lot of times the belts will only go on one way, but sometimes they'll go on and they will be completely wrong routing, and if you have stuff spinning the wrong way, it's not going to work very well. So something to be aware of. So as you can see, I got both water pumps up here side by side. Now they do look the same. Now one thing that I want to point out that I did when I took everything apart, you can see on this water pump, the old one, I've got all the bolts sitting right in here. Now what I did is, the new water pump, I had it sitting next to the truck, and as I took a bolt out, I put it in the corresponding bolt hole, because there are different size bolts, and some of them even have a stud up on the top part of it. So it's a good idea to do something like that if you're unfamiliar with it. And like this one is a great example, because there are different stud sizes, bolt sizes, and all that. So with everything off, I can go ahead and put the new one on, and I'll get that going. And another thing to be aware of, so here you can see there's a lot of rust built up. That's where the fan clutch goes on. Now I got a new fan clutch, but to get the old ones off, they just unthread, but they can be very tight. Now they make specialty tools to be able to take that off. What I did is I just put a set of vice grips on the edge of this, and there's a new pulley on the new one, and then I put a big crescent wrench right here on the fan clutch and got it off. That worked for me. If you are just replacing the fan clutch, you don't want to do that. You want to get that specialty tool. I'm going to show you something that might make your life a little bit easier when you're filling up your vehicle. So when you put coolant in here, you need to fill it up until the thermostat opens, allowing the coolant to flow through the engine, and that can allow a lot of air in there. So one thing they make, it's called an anti-spill funnel, which is kind of a lie, it'll still spill. But it's got multiple pieces. This is the first one. It just goes right down here on top of the radiator. The second piece looks like a radiator cap, but it's got a hole in it. You can see that'll fit through there, and that'll go on. And then the last part is the actual funnel piece. And you can see it's got a little plunger that goes in here, so if this is full of coolant, you can do that, but then it just goes right on top. I have to move my hood prop a little bit, make it a little bit easier to see everything. But yeah, so we'll have that there. You can fill it full of coolant, and that'll make life a lot easier. Like I said, it's not perfect. You'll still spill some, but this will help instead of trying to pour in here. The other nice thing is you can have a whole bunch of coolant sitting up here, and as the air bubbles come up and they burp, it'll immediately suck fluid back down into the system to help prevent air bubbles from getting into the system or developing when you're trying to bleed it. So I got everything back together. I used my cool little thing to figure out how to wrap my belt, and I'm actually not going to put the fan on immediately. I'm going to wait for a minute to put that all on. That way I can see everything a lot easier and make sure there's no leaks. So I'll start the truck up with no fan on there, and then make sure everything is good. And after I fill it up, make sure it's good, and we'll be on our way. One thing I forgot to mention is when you're doing this and you have the vehicle running, you should have your heater on. It'll help flow coolant up through your heater core. That way that doesn't cause an air bubble. That way coolant will get through every part of the system. So I'm going to keep bleeding this, and I'll get back with you. Alright, so took the truck out for a test drive and everything seems to be good. I've got a heater, blows nice and hot, it isn't overheating, check for leak, there's no leaks. So some things to remember, on that truck it was fairly easy, it was tight fit, but because of the gaskets that are on there, I didn't have too many leaking problems, but you always want to make sure you don't over tighten the bolts. It's easy to get in that idea that you just want to ramrod the bolts into there. The torque specs for that are only 18 foot-pounds, so I pretty much had to kind of guess because I don't even have a torque wrench that goes low enough to be at 18 foot-pounds. But some other things is we took some parts off of that vehicle that necessarily weren't bad. Now the water pump, that was leaking, and I can show you what I mean. It wasn't leaking out from the gasket, and this might be really hard to see. You can't really see it, I won't be able to get it on there, but on the bottom of most water pumps there's a little pinhole. It's generally called a weep hole because there's a shaft that goes through there, you got your impeller on the back end, well there's bearings and everything that help seal that up, and over time when the bearings and the seals wear out, it'll just start leaking right out of that weep hole, and that's generally how you know a water pump's starting to go bad. On that. Now my truck was it was doing okay. It was starting to get a little warm at times, and I got a little worried because the other day I got warm and it was only about 20 degrees outside, which really shouldn't happen, and it wasn't iced up or snow packed on the radiator. But some of the other stuff that we could take off is the radiator cap. It wasn't necessarily bad, but we have a spare now. The serpentine belt, absolutely. I took it off, I replaced it. There was some minor cracking on it. I probably didn't need to replace it, but now I have a spare serpentine belt that I can throw in my truck. With all that though, everything went out well. If you have any questions, put it in the comment section below. I'll try to answer them as best I can. And until then, you all have a good one.